So I'll start off. Once again, thank you for being here. That was an excellent keynote address. My question is, when discussing Tunisia and the reaction to a bad dictatorship, you said that there were two reactions. There was the westernized portion of the population who were educated and middle income, who reacted by focusing on human rights, and there was the lower segment of the population that reacted in some cases by turning to war. And I thought it was interesting that you described the population as westernized like that, and I was wondering if you thought that it's important for the Arab world in general to sort of separate from Western ideology and effects like that, or if there is a way to sort of forge a partnership going forward. Because when you describe the population as being somewhat westernized, it seemed like you sort of equated that with being sort of a higher income level and a higher education. And I thought that was interesting. And I didn't know if you feel that that is a good thing for other Arab nations to sort of follow in that sort of path, or if they can sort of become their own identity that is separate from Western ideology while still not turning to extremism or war.
I might answer the question one by one, or take a lot of questions. One by one. Yes. Once again, things are always more complex than we consider. For instance, when we talk about westernized part of the society, it doesn't mean that all of them, are just client of the West. But I mean that some of them, let me tell you something that even in the richest part of the population, you can have Islamists. Okay, and then even in the poorest part of the population, we would have people, interested in human rights, and so the divide is not that simple. Now, when I talk about the West, I always, in our countries, we have a lot of anti-Western feelings, very, very strong, just like you have the Islamophobia here in this country, and I have always. I'm trying always to warn our young students, look, when you talk about the West, you have to distinguish between governments, civil society, and values. And I always tell them, we have a lot to learn from the Western values, even if we don't accept all of them, but we have to learn from values. Don't forget that we have a good relationship with the Western civil society. I can assure you that if I am here now living and talking with you, it's probably due to the Western Human Rights Association like Amnesty International. I was in prison, I was harassed, I have had two temptations to be killed, etc., etc. And I was protected myself. And a lot of human rights activists because of this Western Human Rights Association, etc. So, and I always tell my fellow citizens that don't mix between Western values, Western civil society, and Western government. Otherwise, it will be a terrible sensation of all of them are Western. So when you make this difference, it's no problem, to say, I accept some values that come from the West, like human rights, being also a good Muslim and a good Arab. And this is what we are trying, to teach to our youth. Thank you.
Thank you. So, in regards a little bit with that, do you believe that the role of women will be very important to achieve this consensus of a better, maybe, as you said, better structure that works for the Arab world? Do you believe the role of women will be very important, or maybe not that important? And if so, what paths do you think the governments and societies should take to involve more women in power, in positions of power, and important roles in the government?
Well, I think the answer is obvious. How do you expect from human rights activists to answer? It's quite obvious that empowering women is part of our social and economic liberation. That has been said, from the beginning of the century in Tunisia by a lot of intellectuals. I remember that one of our most important thinker, said that, look, we are not going to liberate Tunisia without liberating Tunisian women. And so this is extremely obvious. It's accepted, well accepted all over Tunisia, but I would say everywhere in the Arab world. Now the problem is how to process, you know,
How do you get there?
How to get there? Very, very few tiny part of the extremist Islamists would say, no, look, we're the women, etc., etc. Nobody would dare to say that we don't need the women empowerment, etc. And I can assure you that in Tunisia have advanced in this process very, very far. For instance, we have now a law that you cannot. 50% of the parliament should be women, and this is extremely important, you know. And we have this policy in all the political levels, economic level, etc., etc. So there's no more legal, constraint against promoting women's rights. It's just a matter of time and changing the mentality of the deep society, because we still have deep society in the countryside, in the hinterland, etc. But mentality are moving slowly, and I hope that I can tell you something. I have been professor in public health for more than 20 years, and I saw year after year, you know, the feminization of my public. You know, so when I left the university, 70% or more than 70% of the students were female students. This is a big good indicator.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kalila. I'm from the U.S. And thanks again so much for being here and for making time for us. I wanted to ask about the Truth and Dignity Commission that you established in 2014. So following the revolution that was established to investigate human rights violations committed by the Tunisian state, and having been given a 4-year charter, it's now up this year in 2018. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about their process and what, if any, progress or reports they've made, and how they were pursuing judicial and non-judicial routes towards reconciliation with victims.
The Truth and Dignity Commission was core part of our political transition to democracy. We wanted this transition to be as peaceful as possible. And this is why we have had this, we have set up by constitution this Truth and Dignity Commission. It was not easy because the old political system still very powerful in the deep states, you know, was extremely against this Truth and Dignity Commission. It was not easy, you know, to set up. And I think the mentality is also, it's, once again, here it's a problem of mentality, you know. We Arabs, we don't have this mentality of saying, look, I'm sorry, I did it, I'm sorry, I ask for forgiveness. I would say probably something would disturb you, that's more Christian than Muslims, you know, in our culture, in our deep culture. It's very, very difficult to say, I apologize, I want forgiveness, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. This is not really. This is probably what explained that Truth and Dignity Commission, it was okay in a country like South Africa, but didn't work that well in countries like Morocco or in Tunisia. We have had half of the process. Half of the process means that we have to find out what happened under the dictatorship. We have to. This is what we call the memory duty, you know. But the other part, which is asking for forgiveness, didn't work at all. I have been in many court, you know, to see the process working. 2 months ago, I was in this cases about people died under torture, and nobody now came from the suspect to say, I'm sorry, I would like to be forgiven, etc. So now, those guys would go to the court and be judged like by normal court, and they would be probably sentenced to prison. We try to avoid that. We just tell them, look, come and ask for forgiveness, and you will not go to prison. But as they didn't accept to play they would probably be prosecuted, and they would go to prison. So it was I would say, a half success, not totally success like it was in South Africa. Once again, probably because of this mentality, probably of school. This is my explanation. I don't know if it's true explanation, but it could be.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you again for your wonderful keynote speech. I have a bit of an exotic question. It's about the minorities in Tunisia. There's some minorities. And I was wondering what the safeguards and measures of Tunisia were to make sure that minorities have their rights and can exercise their human rights, including but not limited to the remaining Jews in Tunisia. Thank you.
Well, Tunisia is probably one of the most homogeneous country in the Arab world, because 99% I would say are Arabs, Muslims, Sunni, and even Malikite. Malikite is right within the so we have about 2,000 Jews still living in Tunisia. When I was president, one of the first things I did was to I was the first Arab president to go in the synagogue of Djerba, to say to people, look, now we are under secularist regime. All citizens, whether they're Jews, Christian, or Muslims, are just citizens. I use it when I was in Carthage to receive every Ramadan, the bishop, the rabbi, the rabbin, and the muftis. I think it was a message saying we are no longer under a state considering that Muslims are first citizens, first-class citizens, and Jews are second-class citizens. And you know that now currently we have a minister, from Jews origin. So fortunately, I would say that we don't have this problem. We have some very tiny black minority, and we have had currently a bill against any kind of racism against black. And we have a very tiny minority of Christian, converted Tunisian to Christianism. Also, they are protected by law. So it's not really a problem, just because the minority are very, very tiny.
Thank you.
So, hello, my name is Asma, I'm from Morocco. I would like to know what are the strategies to counter terrorism in Tunisia to make it a more stable country?
Well, it's probably one of the most difficult question I faced when most important challenge I faced when I was president. It's always the challenge because, I remember that the generals, the military, the heads of the military and the police, when we discussed this question, they used always to say, look, it's not problem that can be solved by military, by force. It's a problem that must be solved by social, economic reforms. But the problem is that it's easy to say, but when you begin your social and economic reform, it would take 20 years, sometimes, when you want to change the educational system, etc. It takes a long time. And you have to face the problem every day. So we have decided that we would have short-term policy, middle-term policy, and long-term policy. Short-term policy is, of course, that you have to gather intelligence, using force, etc., because you cannot avoid it. Middle-term, I tried to use the sheikh, the Salafist sheikh. I received Carthage, a lot of those Salafist sheikh, telling them, look, you have to avoid your youth, your young people, are trying to go to Syria, to Iraq, etc. You have to prevent this catastrophe because they are losing their life. We are, as a country, we are losing our reputation, etc. So do something. And we use it with the sheikh, the Salafist sheikh, to preach more moderation, etc., etc. And of course, the long-term policy is social and economic development, especially to where these people come from, mainly from the hinterland and mainly from the suburbs. I can say even the slums down to Tunis. We don't have exactly slums like in countries like in Africa, but in fact very poor neighborhood. And of course, those neighborhoods and the hinterland are the main providers of terrorists.
Thank you.
عسلامة.
أهلا مرحبا.
عايشك. So my name is Ghada. My parents are from Tunisia, but I grew up in Canada. And every year I go to Tunisia. And when I compare health, the health system, education, work conditions, salaries from Canada and Tunisia, for me it's a disaster. I don't understand why so many graduates in Tunisia, they cannot find job opportunities, why the salaries are so low, why the health system is so expensive. It's not affordable for people upper than the middle class. So, you know, we had a revolution, nothing changed. I think even it's worse after the revolution than before the revolution. And you said that we have to change our mentality, maybe it's in the culture. I don't know, I think it's more in the hands of the people who are in power, the problem. Because when I go to Tunisia and I talk with people, they're educated. They're not, like Tunisian people, they're not very aggressive. They don't like to fight, and they work hard. So I think it's, there's corruption, and this is why things don't change, because how come after revolution and war, it's still the same? So me, I want, what is the solution? If the citizen cannot change the social structure or economic system, so where is the solution? Who can do it? So this is my question.
So you said nothing has changed. I can assure you that something very important has changed, that you can talk in Tunisia without being harassed by the secret police. What's happened for this country more than I have lived all my life under the threat of the secret police. I have been arrested many times. I went to jail because I was against the torture, etc., etc. So something has happened extremely important that you do not appreciate because you didn't live under the dictatorship. This is the first. In Tunisia, you have freedom of expression, freedom of association. You can, for the first time of your history, of the history of 3,000 years, now you live in a free countries, and now you are not considered by the state as a subject, but as a citizen. This is extremely important. Now for the economic and social problem. Look, we have inherited of 50 years, of misconception of social and economic development, of corruption, etc. You cannot expect a country, to move to the Canadian status in just a few years. Now we are in this process. This process has stopped. I can assure you that we have done a lot of mistakes, etc. I confess that we have done a lot of mistakes. That the process is now stopped. But the process will resume. And I hope it will resume with you, young like you. And when you say, hey, it's because of you, politician.
I didn't.
No, I would. I
didn't say that.
No, this is always what people say in
No.
Tunisia. I can assure you that I'm a politician. I know that everybody here in Tunisia, he says, hey, you politician, you don't do your job. Hey, you politician, you are not good enough. Hey, you're a politician, etc. And I always say, not only to be provocative, okay, I am not doing my job, but what about you? You young people, are you doing your job? Are you going to polls, for instance? Are you working hard, etc., etc.? So the responsibility now in our country is shared by everybody. You stop accusing politician, and I stop accusing you. So everybody will stop accusing ourselves, and then we go. We say, okay, we are in a terrible situation. We have improved our political and psychological situation. Now we have to improve our social and economic development. We have to work hard, everybody, and everybody has to do his duty. Not only the politician, but everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, my name is Adena. I'm from Ethiopia. First of all, thank you so much for your keynote address. My question is on migration. So I know that Tunisia acts as a transit destination for an influx of migrants from all over Africa. And also Tunisia also has a lot of youths that are migrating to Europe. So what do you think is the main solution for this? And what role does the UN play in this? Because this seems like a human rights violation by traffickers. So that's my question.
Well, this is also a new problem that we didn't face before. The problem is now Tunisia is caught between two pressure coming from the north, from the European country, saying, hey, you have to stop the influx coming from the south. And many of them would say, we will give you a lot of money, but keep them in your country. This is what they say to Libyans also. So we are caught between the pressure of the northern country, the European country, and the pressure of this migration coming from the south. And it's terrible influx because we don't know exactly how and how we could stop it, because it's really a major problem. For the moment, a lot of the routes go through Libya and not that much to Tunisia. But we know that probably we are going to have one day or another a lot of African migrants coming from the south. And this problem is also very important in Algeria and very important in Morocco. And this is a new phenomenon because we have our own youth trying to immigrate via illegal means, and we have to accept, or we have to suffer from this new wave of migrants. So the situation probably would become untenable in the next 10 years if we do not do something. And what to do? To do what? Probably is not to have camps like they have in Libya, because in Libya the situation is extremely inhuman, humiliating, terrible, everything. You know. They have horrible camps in Libya. Prisoner of war, I would say, prisoner of war. It's a really terrible situation. For the moment in Tunisia, we have resisted all the pressure of the European countries. We now have to have such camps in our country. Libya, Morocco, Algeria also are facing the problem. Once again, while we have also to manage our own youth trying to, to go illegally to Europe. So it's a very difficult situation, very tough situation. Probably you cannot resolve this problem without having a lot of money coming from Europe, coming from everywhere, and promoting jobs where you have social and economic development. I know that you in Ethiopia now, economy is getting better and better, so we hope that you would retain your own youth. I hope that we in Tunisia and Morocco and Algeria also would retain our own youth, and that probably if we don't have social and economic development in sub-Saharan countries, we will have to manage a huge problem whether in North Africa or in Europe. And I pray for God that we find a solution. Otherwise, the impact would be terrible, even here in Germany, because the impact would probably be the rise of far rights movements against immigration. And this far rights movement is not only a danger, threat against the youth coming from, it's a threat against the very democratic system of those countries. So by this mechanism, we can threaten even the social and stability and the political stability of the countries, which seems very rooted in democracy. But I don't believe that there is a country we can say that can be safe from this far right fascism getting more dangerous every day. I do not agree when I talk about Egypt.
No, I was actually agreeing. I wanted to agree with you. It is true. And I'm Nadine from Egypt, by the way. Thank you for being here with us. And I completely agree, especially with the dictatorship. It's even worse than before. Yes. And my question is, what is the one characteristic that you believe every leader, especially Arab leaders, should possess? And what is the one mistake you witness Arab leaders frequently do than other leaders?
Well, I would say that let's talk about the Sisi.
Yes.
Take him as an example.
Yes.
this guy, I met him twice. I heard him talking. And I can assure you that I not despise him. I'm not against him as a human being, but I would pity him because he's getting, the mechanism of the Arab dictatorship is always the same.
Yes.
I feel that I am almighty, that I can do everything, etc., etc. And I begin by some crimes, some big corruption. And then suddenly I realized that I had been, I broke the law, and that I could be considered as accountable. And then I would get afraid, and then I would see that people are protesting against my crimes, so I would commit more and more crime, and then I would be prisoner of my own crimes.
Yes.
And suddenly I realized that I cannot leave power, because if I leave power, I would go to jail or go down. And this is the very mechanism of this cycle, where you are trapped by your own mistakes. You cannot leave power, because if you leave power, you are lost. And then because you are afraid of leaving power, then you would commit more and more crime, etc., 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 until you are thrown out. And this is why I'm so proud to say that I am probably the only Arab leaders after leaving power. I didn't want to jail, I didn't want to cemetery, I didn't want to exile. I want home. This is it's very very unusual, because Arab leaders, leaving power means that they go to cemetery, to prison, or to exile.
Yes.
Nothing else. So this is the mistake. And the other mistake is cultural, is to consider that power is not a social function. Power is privilege. Power is not privilege. Power is not the privilege that you would share with your family or tribe. Power is responsibility. Power is social function. You have to deal with the social function, just like a physician. When you are a physician, you don't enjoy, you have to do your job. You have to do your job with dignity, with efficiency. And I hope that the new generation of Arab leaders would have this new mentality. And I think that something is coming. We have to accept that historical processes are very low. But okay, I am Arab, and I have this new mentality. So I think that many other leaders would have the same mentality, that slowly and surely we would reach this new mentality, and that we get rid of what Ibn Khaldun called the asabiyya. Because the core problem is that we are still inhabited by the asabiyya.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jens. I'm from Germany. First of all, thank you so much for taking the time to answer all of our questions. I actually have a rather personal question for you.
Yeah.
So, during what challenges did your family, and especially you yourself, face during your exile to Morocco? And how did your father's activism inspire you to become an activist for democratic change in Tunisia?
Well, this is very personal. I don't like to talk about my person, but I'm not going to avoid the question. Yes, I have been brought in a family very politicized. My father was a political activist too, and I think I followed his example, because he revolted against the dictatorship of Bourguiba, and before that against colonialism, etc. And I learned from him that you have to fulfill your duty towards your country. He was an example, a good example for. But the problem when you follow this kind of example, you have to pay very high. It's very expensive. I mean, when you want to be, I would say, involved in promoting human rights or democracy in a country like ours at that time, in the 70s and the 80s, the cost is extremely high. But you have to accept it. If you want to respect yourself, you have to accept it. You have to accept that you have to do something for your country, just not for yourself, for your family. I think there are too many kinds of person. Person would say, I'm responsible only for myself, my family, my daughter, my woman, etc., etc. And other people would say, no, I'm responsible also for the whole society. And when you belong to this group of people saying, I am responsible for the whole society, be careful because you will pay a high price. You can go to jail, you can be killed, etc., etc. But you can become a president if it happens. So you have to. The easiest way is to say I'm responsible for myself. The most difficult, I'm responsible not only for. You look, there are people who would say I'm responsible for the humanity, for the mankind, and I appreciate and I respect those people.
Thank you.
Hello, sir. So I'm Dr. Vivek from India, sir. And it was a wonderful speech, in fact, like which you gave down, and you stated about the problems and also you gave the solutions also. I think the problem is only in the implementation which is there. My question to you is that why is there in the whole of the Middle East or the Arab nations the inheritance of power which is constantly there, and there is nobody who questions this inheritance of power which is there? For example, even the recent Saudi crisis which has happened, everybody know that there has been a fault which is there in the Saudi. There has been a fault, or there has been a issue where like it's come from the top, but then there is nobody who questions this. So is this because of the inheritance of power which comes down?
Well, about the inheritance of power, let me remind you that you have two Arab countries where the nationality refers to a family. Saudi means that you belong to the Saudi family. Imagine that here in Germany you would say that you are a Merkel German. Doesn't mean anything. But in this country, citizenship is linked to the name of a family. And also they have the same thing in Jordan. You have the Hashemite, etc. This is unique in the world, that you have a citizenship linked to the name of family. It means that the family has a kingdom. Normally, a family would possess, a farm or something. But here, this kind of family, they possess a whole country and the whole population. So they can afford to give the name of their family to the citizenship of this country. This is very, very strange. You would find it only on the Arab world. But now things are changing. I can assure you that, for instance, mainly after what happened in Istanbul by the killing of this journalist, Jamal Khashoggi, things are moving very, very fast, even in Saudi Arabia, everywhere now. So when you say people are not questioning their hands, that's not true. People are now questioning more and more, and we have set up as intellectual, as politician, now the dream of people of citizens, Shab al-Muwatinin. This is the main that we are not citizens of a state, we are not citizens of a family, we are citizens of a nation, and that we will fight for Shab al-Muwatinin. This means for the people of citizens, only accepting the rule of law, the rule of principle, and no longer accepting the preeminence of a sheikh or of an emir or of a king or of nothing. This is the way that we are moving towards. It will take time, but we are on this process, and nothing will stop this process. Nothing.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Parkash, and I'm from Pakistan. I would like to thank you for the excellent keynote speech. It was really illuminating about the Arab world in general and in Tunisia in particular. And I would like to first of all say that I agree with you on most of the things, almost on all of the things that you described in your speech. The Arab world is facing a lot of problems. This is true. But this wasn't true historically. Historically, if we see in the past, the Arab world or the Muslim world was leading the scientific developments in the past centuries, like in the 10th century, 8th century, 9th century, we had Muslim philosophers who were leading in arithmetics, mathematics, we have examples of Al-Farabi, Al-Khwarizmi, and a lot of others. And then the Western world was facing the dark times. See, the situation was completely opposite. But like slowly and gradually, it changed. After the Dark Ages, the Western world or the Western civilization had the period that is called the Renaissance. And then ideological illumination began, and that was the revival of the Europe or the West. They did advancement in technology, in ideas, in philosophy, in literature, in arts, in literally everything. And then since then they have been ruling the world. And the Muslim world went downward and downward and downward. And I personally believe that if the Muslim world wants to come up, they need a separate or at least an Arab Renaissance or a Muslim Renaissance. My question is that, do you agree with this notion? Or if you do agree, how do you think this is going to be possible?
Well, I know that we Arabs and Muslims, we have this attitude of considering the Middle Age as our golden age, and we are proud of this golden age, etc., etc. Of course, at that time we were leading mathematics, philosophy, etc., etc. But we don't forget that at this time we have slavery. Don't forget that at this so-called golden ages, women didn't really nearly exist as a human being, etc. So don't have this fantasy about this golden age. It wasn't a golden age, it was a difficult age like ours. They have their own political problem, they have their own social economic problem, etc. And don't see our current situation as also very dark, because we in this situation now we don't have slaves, women are empowered, we have equality, we can challenge our leaders, etc., etc. So we didn't move from, as you would say, from the golden age to the dark age. I would say that it was a dark and bright age, and now it's a dark and bright age. This is my opinion. And now it's true that we have lost our first position as leaders in science and mathematics, etc., etc. But okay, this is very common, you know. Sometimes, for one reason or another, some nation would lead. We have been the leaders. Now the Western are the leaders. Probably the Chinese would lead, or Indian would lead in the next century, and then we Muslims would come back in the 22nd century, etc. That's not important. What is important is that for the human being, as a human race, you know, we continue processing. Whether it's who would invite, you know, the best weapons against cancer, I don't mind. I hope it would be an Arabic scientist, but I don't mind if it's Pakistani scientist or a Chinese scientist, because this would be important for all of the human race. So try to forget about, you know, golden age, dark age. We were the first, now we are the least, etc., etc. We were not the first, we were not the better at that time, we were not the least at this time, etc. Things are much more complex. So please be more subtle than, you know, okay.
Your Excellency, thank you for your wonderful presentation and for being present here today. I'd have a question for you.
Yeah.
First of all, my name is Aline and I'm from Romania.
From?
Romania.
Romania.
So, Your Excellency, do you think that cultural diplomacy can help overcome the differences in the various interpretations of human rights, such as those between the United Nations Declarations on Human Rights and the Declaration on Human Rights in Islam, issued by the Organization of the Islamic Conference, of which Tunisia is also a member?
Well, I'm sorry, I am not very, very familiar of this word of cultural diplomacy. All what I know is that, look, when you have good music, when you have good films, when you have good poetry, everybody would be extremely interested in taking, you know, and using it. So you have just as a cultural leader to produce more and more sophisticated cultural products like songs, like film, etc., and be quite sure that if it's good, it will be taken everywhere. I know that when I was young, I have all my ideas about India came from the films that you used to send to the Arab world. And so it was cultural diplomacy without cultural diplomacy, without these words. You know. This was really diplomacy, exchange between among people. So what I would like to see that more and more exchanges. Unfortunately, with with the new system, with the new technology, etc., it's easier and easier. So we have just to put more and more efforts to promote our product, our cultural product, and everything will be okay.
If you'd like, I could share with you the definition of cultural diplomacy as seen by the OECD.
Yeah.
So, cultural diplomacy may be best described as a course of actions which are based on and utilize the exchange of ideas, values, traditions, and other aspects of culture or identity, whether to strengthen relationships, enhance social-cultural cooperation, or promote national interests.
I agree.
So,
I totally agree with this definition. I think it's. I have always said that as a Muslim, as an Arab, I would consider that everything produced by the West, like music of Bach, Jean Sebastian Bach, or the poetry of, I'm very fond of the haiku poetry of Japan, etc. I think all these products are mine as a human being. I would accept them as mine. The same way that I consider that Arab music or Arab literature, etc., has to be, widely spread all over the world, and that you Indian and you Pakistani, etc., it's your heritage. We have to stop thinking matter of races, religions, etc. We are in the globalized world. We are the same human being, the same human race. Everything is ours. Everything you produce is mine, and everything I produce is yours.
So, Your Excellency, do you think that by cultural diplomacy we could actually try to force the understanding and to have a common interpretation on human rights and not different ones?
Absolutely, I agree, totally agree, and this is true. I totally agree.
Thank you.
Next group, the final group. So thank you again, once again, for the very high honor that you've given us for coming here to Berlin on the occasion of the annual conference on cultural diplomacy in the Arab world. I'd like to begin by actually just asking two questions, which have been on my mind during your talk, but also during the questions now. Maybe simple questions. The answers, I don't know if they're so simple. First question is, why was the entire world seemingly surprised by the Arab Spring? In the sense, we've got all of these wonderful intelligence agencies, etc., but it really seemed that everyone was surprised. That's my first question. Second question, I can clarify perhaps afterwards. If we had had a different strategy for cultural diplomacy with Tunisia, might it have also helped us to see that this Arab Spring was actually on its way, far before when it actually came? So those are my two simple questions.
Well, why people were surprised? I would say I would be very clear with you, because people were racist. I have heard many times when I was in Europe, people saying, look, democracy is not for Arabs. Democracy is Western value. And I want to say, look, it's not Western value, because look, the most important democratic country is India. India is not so. No. India is something special. You Arabs, you are not fit for democracy. I have heard this from a prominent politician. So when because it was a democratic revolution that broke out, they were very surprised. And let me tell you that I was very happy. We have the word in Arab, shamata. Shamata, it's the bad joy, when you see them. Look, we are capable of promoting, etc., etc. So I think it's mainly racism. And probably it's also because short-term thinking, sticking to symptoms, and not analyzing correctly what's going on. And what I told you, that behind the destructive symptoms of the dysfunction of the society, you have always behind the scene constructive forces that are setting up new ideology, new forms of organization, etc. And this process will never stop. Even now, when you have this failure of failure of the first wave of revolution, because this is the first wave. I always say that what we call Arab Spring, we have seen the first wave, and now we are going to see the second wave. The second wave would probably be more vigorous and more brutal than the first wave. I didn't catch the second question.
If let's say there had been different strategies for cultural diplomacy between the USA and Tunisia, between France and Tunisia, etc., and also perhaps from Tunisia to other countries, if we had had different strategies for doing cultural diplomacy, could that have helped us to have maybe seen this coming?
No, because it's the same. Because Tunisia is not different country. We have the same human beings, we have the same society. You have to convince people that what you are going to sell them, it's worth buying. And you have to use the good strategy, to open hearts and minds, because the more you are frank with the people, the more you could be accepted, etc. I think they have the same strategy. Tunisia is not a specific society. Tunisia is a human society, just like the Rwandese society. It means you have good guys and bad guys, you have stupid guys and intelligent guys, etc. Now, what you should study very carefully is what Tunisia can give you. What's the specific point that you can have, you don't have in Algeria or in Morocco, that you can pick up and sell it somewhere else. That's the only way. But otherwise, I think the strategy of selling the strategy is quite the same.
Okay, let me clarify that, and then I'll give the microphone to the others. I don't want to dominate this. I would characterize cultural diplomacy for the most part in the 20th century was the simple idea, actually Joseph Nye at Harvard University characterized the best, was soft power as opposed to hard power, smart power, or some would say this idea of winning the hearts and minds of foreign audiences. You made a reference before, if it's a good movie, people will buy it, and the quality is important. Yes, I think you're right. On the other hand, we have to keep in mind globalization is actually not fair. There are winners and there are losers. So not always the best film, gets around, and sometimes it has to do with many other factors. Meaning that actually cultural diplomacy for the most part in the 20th century was actually about speaking as opposed to listening. And what I mean by that, if I'm an American ambassador, I want to bring American movies, American music, American literature, American poets, etc. And it was really speaking, so to speak, telling our stories. It wasn't so much listening. And I would say if the goal of cultural diplomacy today is to actually foster understanding and to foster trust, actually, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, as I always tell my students. We should do twice as much listening. And if you could imagine a different kind of cultural diplomacy, less about speaking, more about listening. What if, let's say, the Americans had been reading Tunisian literature? What if they had been listening to Tunisian hip-hop? What if they had been watching Tunisian films? I think they really could have seen the handwriting on the wall. Actually, in the case of Egypt, I would argue, as well as in Tunisia. But we weren't. We were so proudly saying Facebook, this and that, Twitter. I was speaking to German diplomats at the time, American diplomats, who would show me their business cards proudly. This is my Twitter account. This is my Facebook. Look at the modern diplomat I am. On the one hand, great. On the other hand, we were using the social media wrong, I would argue. We were sending tweets. We weren't reading tweets. We were publishing on our Facebook pages. We weren't reading the Facebook pages. Can you believe everything on the social media? No. On the other hand, can you believe everything with the official media? Also no. So that would be perhaps the job for a new kind of cultural diplomacy today, to do more listening, so to speak, than speaking. To have, let's say, film exchanges between Tunisia and Europe. This exists to a certain degree already now, but more of it. And so that's what I meant by if we had had a different strategy for cultural diplomacy, I actually think it could have assisted in seeing something that actually didn't happen overnight. But this was a process that had been building, I think, over much more time, which is documented in books, in TV shows, in films, and music as well. So that was what I meant, and I think. But I'd be curious on your reaction. I mean, do you think that could be useful? It's useful in the sense more exchange, more going back and forth to maybe get insights into how societies are ticking in terms of pressures for problems, or as well as the good things or the successes.
Well, you are talking about one issue, one important issue. I would call it cultural imperialism. Cultural imperialism is probably the most. It's a threat for a lot of big countries or small countries who can afford it, to sell their films, their culture, etc., etc. And this is really a threat. But how would you deal with it? The only way is that every country, even the small country, the smallest country, would produce. If they produce something worth buying, they would sell it. This is the only way, because we won't be able to stop this the huge amount of videos coming from rich countries, film coming from rich countries, etc., etc. I don't see how you can look. You probably know that now we are not watching the disappearance of species, but also languages. You know that more than 50% of 70% are languages are disappearing in the world. And this is a cultural loss, an important cultural loss because of the imperialism, because everybody we're going very soon, all humanity we're going to speak pidgin English, okay? And while speaking pidgin English, we are losing native language. We should do something to save the subject, but we are not doing it because probably the process is not stoppable. So you raise very, very important question within the question of the strategy. Behind this question, you have the most important question is the cultural imperialism. I don't see the response. Otherwise, then produce the best and try to survive because it's struggle for survival.
So I think you have a very good point. Maybe just one final response, and then I'll give it to you. Sorry about this. But I think it's a very important topic, especially for the conference. You have a point. I think the goal of culture diplomacy is not to stop imperialism or not to stop, let's say, capitalism. I think that those are, phenomena that will continue probably for a long time. But I think the job of cultural diplomacy is to accept the reality that we're in and to try maybe to help the balance to be a little bit more even, to make sure that we get to see, let's say, 100 different narratives or 100 different stories of 100 different Tunisians. Maybe we're only hearing one in the media before, and so that's where I think. We're not going to stop this. We're not going to close down Hollywood. I don't think that we should do that. I mean, there's some wonderful films, also some terrible films, but I think that's the idea, to see how we can counterbalance this, to accept, okay, this is the current situation. Much of the world does not know much about, let's say, Tunisia. We were looking at some statistics the other day in terms of how many Americans know about the Arab world, etc. And I prefer not to repeat the quotes, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So that's where I'm getting at there. So anyway, but very, very important points and reflections.
I totally agree with you.
Okay.
The way the raised the question, I totally agree.
All right, so we'll see. We can discuss it more later, but I want to share the microphone. I'm not sure who's next.
Thank you, Excellency, for your time. My name is Rosemary. In reference to your speech, you said that the situation in Tunisia is not rosy, with high unemployment rate. Do you think that the current government policy empowers the Tunisian youths, or even improve and invest in the youth's lives? And are there even policies for empowering the Tunisian youths, and how successful are these policies?
The main problem after the revolution is that people, believe that okay, now we have had this revolution, everything would be okay, and we were going to have employment, etc. And people are very, very, very soon disappointed because that doesn't happen. Because after a revolution, you inherit extremely difficult situation, just because you have a deep state, corrupt state at every level, and that would take a long time now to have a new way of thinking, of functioning, a new state able, to promote this social and economic development. And the situation of our youth currently in Tunisia is really very, 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 very difficult because a lot of them would say it would take years and years to improve the economic situation. So let's go to France. And now we have a brain drain. We have more brain drain than before the revolution. Now Tunisians are sending I would say thousands, but hundreds of physicians or people working in artificial intelligence, etc., etc. So poor country, we are providing a rich country with our best young people, and this brain drain is like hemorrhage in the body, and it's very, very, very tough situation. But once again, I'm a pessimistic man. Pessimistic man means that you don't have illusion, you have terrible diagnosis of the situation, but you still hoping that you can do something, and because you are hoping to do something, and because you do something, that you can improve the situation. Otherwise, things would worsen, and the situation of young people, etc., would worsen. I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, you did. But are there nothing the government could do to bring these people that you said that are actually successful back to the country to improve their country rather than taking it to the worst?
I don't know. I hope so. I hope that if the situation will improve, we will have new brain drain from the other side, but for the moment, it's not the situation.
Thank you, Your Excellency. My name is Yara Mouana and I'm from Syria and I'm doing my PhD here at ICT. And my question to you is actually going to be with the voice of minorities. And as I said, I'm from Syria and in Syria we have 86 different religious groups. We add to that one big group, which is the liberal secular group that doesn't care about any religion, specifically in the term of a religion that rules, but maybe a religion on a vertical level. So basically, we are secular in that level. And in Tunisia, you said that you are more homogeneous community with 99% of Muslim Sunni Maliki, and that's not the case in Syria. And my question to you is how, to be frank, as a Syrian, I was very skeptical of our revolution, simply because it came in from the mosques, it came in from the people with less education, it came in from people who were not practicing democracy on their own families. So again, we go back to the concept of culture. And I also witnessed and saw how the Tunisia is also has a good foundation of secularism, of the concept of citizenship, the concept of constitution, regardless of what was there in the political power in Tunisia. But the Tunisians themselves are better developed in that level to understand and to carry the responsibility and the rights of democracy, rather than in many areas where the majority, unfortunately, might be saying something that will stop our rights. The people who were opposition in not the time of the light dictator, let's say, but at the time of the father, where we come from the background of political prisoners with people that were also escaping from the intelligence and the things like that. But when we saw the revolution, we were also escaping from those who were calling for jihad in our mosques next to us. So basically, political Islam, also there, and a lot of these Arab Spring results came in with political Islam. How do you see I can build up trust with the new movements, with the change? Because yes, we all want the change, but on what cost? Is it on the cost of minorities, especially in countries like Syria or maybe Lebanon in the future, or God forbid? But we say these countries of a lot of minorities, a simple rule of only Islamic, let's say, political Islam, will definitely diminish the rights of all these minorities. So how can you see that? Where's the balance? How can we trust what Islam should do, or the parties in Islam? Islam itself as an ideology and everything is very clear for us. We are Arabs and we know it, and we deal with it in a lot of respect and trust, but the Islam in a political way.
You have raised three questions, very different. You have raised the question of minority, the question of political Islam, and the question of whether the Syrian people were ready for democracy. Let me respond. The first question, minority. Let me give you, if you accept a piece of advice, never use this word, because this word of minority, majority, is part of this mentality, this destructive mentality. You should talk about the component of the society. You have to refuse this concept of minority, majority. Because when you talk about minority, majority, it means that you have first-class citizens, second-class citizens. You have to accept that the Syrian identity is made of a lot of components. The Syrian people is made of different components. It's just like, a bouquet of the flower, flowers, you have a lot of flowers when you have a bouquet. This should be your way of considering the identity of the Syrian people. Components and not majority and minority. And because you in Syria, in Iraq, and everywhere, we have this concept that even in Egypt, majority is Muslim and the minority is Christian, and it's everywhere. This is extremely dangerous because the minority would see itself as harassed, unaccepted, etc., and would revolt. So please give up this way of thinking. We must give up thinking majority, minority, just component, different component, equal, and this equal in rights, etc., of the population. So now the second question, it's about whether the Tunisian society was more mature, etc. That's not true at all, because the Syrian society was extremely mature also. Even in Syria, there were a westernized society, middle class society, etc., etc. So the social structure was not that different from Tunisia. But what was the difference? Is that in Tunisia, our dictatorship was, I would say, a shy dictatorship. Yours was brutal, harsh, and extremely aggressive dictatorship. And this aggressive dictatorship didn't accept anything from the Syrian people. You said that the first demonstration comes from mosques. That's not true. The first demonstration, I know very well the situation in Syria, where I'm not Syrian because I was extremely interested in watching the process in every country. The first, you remember that the first rallies in Syria, the people was crying, was shouting, واحد واحد الشعب السوري واحد. It means we are one. And so they didn't talk about majority and minority. And the only thing they wanted at the time was, we want more freedom, we want some reform. They didn't say we want the overthrow of the government. They said just we want more reforms, etc. But the way that the regime reacted to is one of the harshest and the most criminal reaction from an Arab regime. And look, the situation now, the regime has destroyed the country just to stay in power. This is the price. Now, about the political Islam. I am not Islamist. I am always I consider myself a secularist, and I'm quite sure that the political Islam has failed, totally, completely. And I have said many things to even my Islamist friend. They don't like this opinion, but this is my opinion. I know that nationalism has failed, pan-Arabism has failed, political Islam has failed, and I'm afraid that the democratic system would fail. I'm not sure that let me explain why I believe that political Islam has failed. Political Islam has two branches, military, jihad, and political. The military has completely failed because they didn't change any regime. Nowhere they could overthrow a regime and replace it by a better regime, whether in Algeria, whether even in Afghanistan, everywhere. So trying to change the society by using violence didn't work. And you have the other part of the political system, political Islam, which is represented by Ennahda in Tunisia, or Hizb al-Adala wa Tanmiya in Morocco, etc., etc. And there, political Islam is part of the system. Part of the system, and even part of the old system, working with the old system that we Democrats would like to transform. And they have given up everything about Islamic State, etc., etc. So there are, in fact, Islamist political parties now in Morocco, in Tunisia, in Jordan, everywhere. They are part of the system. They are conservative parties. They don't have anything to do with the revolution, etc., etc. So the project of Islamization of the society is completely, it's over. Now the process, as I told you, we have experimented nationalism, pan-Arabism, we have experimented political Islam. Now we are trying to set up democracy. I don't know if it will last in the countries like Iraq, if it will last in countries like Tunisia, etc. It didn't last long in Egypt, just 1 year, and then reverted to dictatorship. Now, what we should do is to go on this experimentation, is a gigantic experimentation, until we reach some equilibrium. I don't know what kind of equilibrium we are going to reach, when, but what I am sure is that we are in the midst of the process and that we cannot escape it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Okay. And if you can stay here for one more